Hi, everybody. I'm going to click this slide one time to make sure it works, and I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to start, just so everyone knows it doesn't freak out. It works perfectly. Hi, everybody. This is Feedback, playtesting for design and how to ask the right questions by myself, Scandariato. So I am a professional game designer. I currently work with Rose City Games here in Portland, Oregon. I graduated in 2015 with a Bachelor's of Science in Game Design from Full Sail University. Worked in mobile for a period of time. I released Plunge just this year with my own personal studio, Spooky Buns. I also released World Next Door and Cat Lady in early access. Currently also working on Cat Lady and some other projects that we can't talk about with Rose City. But what we can talk about is playtesting for design. So for this talk, we'll be looking at feedback through the lens of a game designer and focusing on playtesting for design. This is slightly different than playtesting for bugs or traditional QA. It does not replace traditional QA. QA is a valuable part of any game process and is necessary. But playtesting for design is involving players early and often throughout the development of a game in order to gather experience feedback. Experience feedback is unrefined thoughts, criticisms, and suggestions given by players during playtesting. It can be gained in two ways, directly and indirectly. And it can include bug reports. But once again, we'll be primarily structuring playtesting questions on qualitative aspects of games rather than functional aspects. So the two ways of getting it are direct and indirect feedback. Direct feedback is questionnaires, interviews, curated feedback forms, Google Forms spread to a large newsletter, things like that. Indirect feedback is observations, expos, exhibitions, watching people play your game on stream if you're able to do so, and so on. So, if you're showing your game to a player in any capacity, at any time, in any stage of development, you should have a goal for the information you're looking to receive. The best way to gain information is to ask prepared questions. Here are a few guidelines to ask the right questions for proper information when using direct feedback. We'll go over indirect feedback slightly afterwards. The first thing is keep your questions actionable. Actionable questions lead to tangible solutions to remedy issues or strengthen parts of the game. Changing values, improving speed and feel, specific aspects of information delivery are all tangible solutions. Is my game fun is not an actionable question, as it does not lead to an action to be taken. It's a very subjective answer. Before you ask a question of a playtester, ask yourself two things. Will this answer a question I have about my game? And am I ready to make changes based on the feedback? I worked at GameStop for 7 long, miserable years. One of our major responsibilities was selling things to people that they didn't want or need. We were trained to never ask someone a yes or no question, as customers are too ready to say no at all times, especially when you're selling them something they don't want. Instead, we were all asked to ask questions in a way that makes the customer think about their answers. Rather than, would you like to reserve a game today? No. We would ask, what games would you like to reserve today? Because it's harder to say no to that question. Let's use this for good rather than evil. Say no to yes or no. Binary questions lead to bad information that's very often not actionable. Ask questions that force the responder to think about their answer in order to gain better information. Did you finish the demo? If I were to say no to that question, I really gained very little. I don't know why they didn't finish it, if they saw a bug, if they didn't feel like finishing, if it was too long, if they walked away. If I ask, how far were you able to progress? It allows space to talk about progression and bugs, strengths and weaknesses. It opens the door to hear more about the player's experience with the game rather than a yes or no question or a binary answer. Lastly, keep it short. Nobody likes homework. Not only the amount of questions, keep the amount of questions limited, but it's important to give your playtesters room to answer fully. Short answers are always better than multiple choice. But the amount of short answers that you present will lower the equity of the amount of feedback the player can give you. So you want to keep it to the most important, pertinent, and actionable aspects of the game that you're looking to playtest at that time. So more on indirect feedback, assuming you can't just give a form to your playtesters. When I was working on Plunge, we had a development for a little over 3 years. We were able to showcase it at a wide variety of PIGSquad events and other events. We never had direct reach, such as a mailing list or targeted questioning. For that reason, a lot of our feedback came from watching people play the game. When it comes to indirect feedback, it's important that players don't think they're being actively watched. and also that they feel comfortable to play in a more natural state. In that, performative natures come from when someone thinks you're watching them. You want to see someone comfortably playing the game. Most of your data will come from watching actions. Most players will not be vocalizing their thoughts at all times as if they were streaming, so it's up to you to notice key aspects of their play. Is there a point where most players stop playing your demo? Is there a mechanic most players seem to have difficulty with? It's up to you to both capture and analyze the information. So take notes. Take so many notes. Take scribbles, take pages of notes, and give yourself opportunity to digest it after the event is finished. So now you've got your information. It's time to digest it. How do you read what players have given you? Looking for trends is one of the biggest aspects. When you're polling large groups of people, or groups of any size really, numerical trends are useful and important. For a large period of time, we believed the Cat Lady was too easy because we are all experienced roguelike players, and we are the best players of Cat Lady in the world because we own it and no one else does. For that reason, we thought, very much so, that the game was too easy, we need to make it harder. After giving our first round of feedback, players largely said the game is trending towards more difficult than less. While we like to look at the big orange bar in the middle, noticing that more players said it's above average difficult than below average difficult gave us a better understanding of what we should be doing. And through this, we realized, one, stop making the game so hard, and two, maybe make it a little easier. Also look for unstated information. For Cat Lady, once again, we polled people to ask which cat was their favorite, basically which weapon was their favorite to play with. From this, we realized two things. Mildred, the big orange blob, was too strong. Too many players gravitated towards that weapon and thought it was the best one, despite the fact that it was the most basic one. Nellie, the smallest green sliver, was too weak. Most players thought it to be not very useful whatsoever. If the majority of players are feeling one way, positively or negatively, there's information to be gleaned and actions to be taken. With this data, we adjusted Nellie's overall usability and decreased Mildred's power, which in turn has led to a more even data distribution after other feedback forms. All this numbers talk is boring, and not every game is strictly mechanical. But there are still trends to be found. The World Next Door was a narrative game primarily, with casual puzzle elements. Because it was a narrative game, we were polling specifically to see if all the characters appealed to people individually. It's impossible for a person to care about every character in an ensemble cast equally. Typically, each person will have personalities that they resonate with more strongly than others. And we were looking for trends about those personalities. This is sort of the Seven Dwarves conundrum. If I asked the room to name all of the seven dwarves, the average person would be able to fully, accurately, and completely name about 3 dwarves. 4 if you really like Disney. 5 if you work for Disney. But no one names all 7. With this, we were looking for trends to see which sets of three playtesters gravitated towards as far as characters went. And we're able to make adjustments such as adding or reducing the number of dialogues or interaction points with those characters based on it. Thankfully, everyone was equally appreciated in the game, but through this, we were able to find trends for narrative rather than mechanics. Important to note when digesting feedback, all feedback is relevant, but not all feedback is useful. When hearing qualitative suggestions, players will often offer suggestions for your game and for ways to fix the problems that they perceive. While these things typically come from a good place, it's important to know what to accept and what to disregard in terms of subjective feedback. Unfortunately, no player will fully understand the conditions of which you're developing your game. It's important to take everything at full value, but equally important to understand what is and is not doable for yourself, your project, your scope, and your team. Relying on pillars of design or core designs is important here, largely when you hear a great suggestion that just doesn't fit. And as much as people cannot understand the development conditions, it's important to take all critiques equally on an emotional level as well. As developers, our projects and games are our darlings. Handing them off to the cruel world is difficult, and hearing that aspects of the game are less than stellar can become disheartening, especially over a long period of time. With that, it's more important than anything else to remain humble and understanding. Playtesters offer their time and opinions to help better the game, and it's our jobs as developers to accept their statements without argument or excuse. Thanks for listening. I apparently have like way time, so if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll leave. It's you.
Yeah. So going back to when you mentioned playtesting for narrative design, balancing those characters with narrative games, it's a lot of time commitment in terms of getting to know those characters. Reading that takes a lot longer than say Cat Lady, where you play 5 minutes and you can determine what you like. In terms of balancing out those characters, do you have any examples in terms of how you guys tested that and kind of how you figured out balancing those characters in a narrative game?
Yeah, so the question was, when we were testing a narrative game, what were methods of which we used to have enough time for players to digest each character so we get relevant information. Is that correct? In that, the game thankfully structured itself in a way that we introduced all the characters more or less one at a time with their primary personalities up front. So when you start the game, you are June, the human girl, and you meet your best friend, Liza, and her personality is your best friend. And you have roughly a 10-second interval of dialogue with them, and then you immediately meet the second character, who's a shy boy. And from there, so with each character we gave you in the start of the game, we gave you almost every character right away. And each of them had their own vignette, so you can get a feel for what their personality was. And through that, because the personalities were so strong in the beginning, players were more easily able to gravitate towards them and immediately say, oh, I like this, I want to know more from this person. For that reason, I think this comes down to structuring your demo really well. If you're demonstrating anything to the public that's outside of core mechanic or here's an alpha playtest, if it's very much qualitative about what do you think of my writing, the demo has to be able to present all of that as strongly as possible, as quickly as possible. And that ties directly into your hook anyway. And through that, you'll be able to hopefully gain trends and understanding.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious with the cat lady slide where you're showing which cats are popular. Did you, or which ones people are using?
Yeah.
Did you determine that from survey or from like actual usage statistics?
That's a great question. So the question was, did we determine this data here on this slide through surveys that we distributed or analytics? We were not able to set up analytics through Unity by the time that we were playtesting because everything is hard to do all the time. This was directly through Google Forms, which is something I really want to nail home. Google Forms is the most useful thing in my life, next to my car. Everything that we use here was, here's the multiple choice, pick one, which is your favorite. And thankfully, we had a really large sample group that allowed us to get this nice pie. But it did come from direct questioning based on acquisition of emails and playtests we had over the years. I'm going to go here and then there.
I have a similar but broader question.
Go ahead.
Related to this slide, just capturing quantitative data in general. Do you have any advice for instrumenting builds and doing that programmatic capture of data?
As far as the Unity analytics parts goes of capturing data internally, if you are able to put Steam or itch.io achievements in your game that are based on checkpoints, that is the easiest way. This was a slide I almost used for Plunge. We have the Steam achievements, and each of them tells us, did you beat the tutorial? Did you unlock the first character? How many people actually beat the game? And that, because we have no mailing lists, no broad playtests, and are really going blind, no analytics, that was the most eye-opening thing. Where I was able to see directly that of all the people that bought the game, 50% of them started it. So from there, you glean down to, all right, 1% of people beat it. I wonder why we only retained that many throughout the whole game. Things like that. I got time for 2 more.
Again, with this slide in particular, when listening to you describe that Mildred was so popular and Nellie was unpopular, and your response was to nerf Mildred and buff Nellie, I'm not sure how specific the question is, but I'm curious what your thoughts are when it comes to receiving feedback about something being so good, and then your response to nerf it when it's something that people might have enjoyed.
Sure, yeah. So the question is, how do we digest this information to think that it is overpowered rather than fine? This comes back to overall balance. Mildred is the first character that you have. It's the first weapon that you have. And for that reason, we wanted it to be the baseline. This is the absolute most basic version of everything you're going to do in this game, with all the other ones being extremes. So here's your shotgun-style cat, and here's a sniper gun-style cat, things like that. For that reason, when we assumed that Mildred would be higher because it's the first cat that everyone has, and therefore is the cat that most people will see, or will see the most as they play. So while we expected it to be higher, we didn't expect it to be this high. We didn't expect it to be roughly 100% higher than Nelly, right? Because Nelly was about 3 to 5%. When looking for trends, typically you set a bar of what is acceptable. So for me, it's if 3 out of 7 people say something, that's probably too much. If 1 out of 7 people say something, that's probably fine. That's a personal preference. So for this, if 30% of all the people that played this game said this is the best one, there's probably something to look into there. And our answer to it was maybe we should reduce it a little bit. Anybody else? No? All right. Do I have time? Yeah, cool. Good.
So you had a slide about how challenging the game was.
Yeah.
And overall, it was skewing towards too challenging. And like maybe this is arrogance, but I could easily look at this data and be like, I know better than you. You've only played this game once.
Sure.
So how do you reconcile that, this data that you're getting back with people with like your own internal idea of how the game's supposed to play?
So the question is, how do you reconcile the idea that you think the information that you have might be in contrast to the information you're receiving? In that, this is half staying humble and half understanding that you're the worst playtester of your own game, unfortunately. Because you have so much experience with it, for even a more specific example, I know what every single enemy in the game will do. I know how they'll move, I know how they'll attack, I know the best way to defeat them. Therefore, I have 1 billion times more information than any player at any time. All of the things that I feel about the game are probably irrelevant after a point. And that is why we use playtests. So while there are aspects of, definitely of this game and any game I've made, where I felt that people just don't understand, you have to sort of check that and make sure that you're completely and fully digesting the information. And setting a bar, again, helps with that. If 3 out of 7 people are saying it, there's probably something there. If 1 out of 7 people are saying it, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm sorry. Time to go home. Well, that's all I got. I'm gonna wait for Will to come collect me. Thank you all for listening.
Unhook yourself.